You love your pastoral staff. You're thankful for them. You think they're doing an okay job, but you still wish they would be a little bit more efficient, maybe a little bit more impactful, maybe have greater capacity. You really just wish they could carry more of the weight so that there wasn't so much on your plate as the lead pastor. But at the same time, you don't really want to spend a ton of time developing this in depth, highly engaging training experience that is going to take up a ton of your time and pull you away from the things that you really enjoy doing. Well, what I want to do today is I want to show you two reasons why putting the time into creating an engaging pastoral training process for your pastoral team, why that is actually worth your time, and it goes way beyond just the performance of your pastoral staff. So, in this episode, that's exactly what we're going to. I'm going to give you two reasons why you need to put the time into creating an engaging pastoral training experience for your pastors, but also for your church and for you. Let's get started. So the big question is this: how do pastors like us who remain focused on the mission of Jesus and serving our communities without being distracted by everything in the world around us, how do we increase our effectiveness while living a lifestyle that doesn't compromise our health, our families, or our personal relationships with Jesus? That's the question this podcast is going to answer. I'm Dr. Brandon Party Cooper, and welcome to the Ministry Hackers Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Ministry Hackers Podcast. I hope you are doing wonderfully. I hope you are having a good day. Things are going really well here at the Party Cooper household. We are in just a crazy, crazy time. I'll talk about that here in a moment. If you are new, if this is your first time that you have joined the Ministry Hackers Podcast, welcome. So glad that you found your way here. My name is Dr. Brandon Party Cooper. I'm the founder here at Ministry Hackers. And our goal, our number one goal here at Ministry Hackers, is to help you as a pastor and ministry leader, to help you live your dream life in ministry, to help you discover that dream life that God has created for you, to help you have more time with your family, more time for hobbies and vacations, more time to sit in the hammock and read a good book, more time to live the life that you have been called to live while pastoring and ministering and making the impact in this world that Jesus has called you to make. Both are possible, but too few pastors live that. And so what we do here at Ministry Hackers is we try to make that a possibility for you as you continue answering the call and serving the people that God has put in your world and in your life. And so welcome here to Ministry Hackers. So as I mentioned, the Party Cooper household is a little bit crazy. We are 2 weeks away from the making of this video. We're 2 weeks away from moving. We are moving to Virginia Beach. And so our house is full of boxes. If I were to turn the camera over, you would see what a mess is happening over here. Boxes and furniture, and everything's being moved and getting ready to put it in the truck and to move across the country. So we're moving out of Iowa and we're moving to Virginia Beach. So super excited about it. There's lots that come with it. For those of you who have been moving or have moved, you know exactly what we are in for. So I will keep you updated as we go through the process, share with you kind of what's happening with us, what's happening with Ministry Hackers in the process, what's happening with our kids as they're transitioning into a new school, everything else. And so thankful for God opening doors and providing and taking care of us as he always does. But it's just cool to see God doing it. It's cool to see in the midst of all of the questions and what's going to happen and where we're going to go and, you know, all of the steps along the way. Just really cool to know and to see God moving even when we didn't see it, even when we didn't understand, even when circumstances were changing and we were like, God, what is happening here? Why is this going on? To see him kind of lay out the plans and walk us through step by step, showing us exactly what we needed to do or what we needed to know in the moments that we did. And so I say all that to give you an update, but also to encourage you, because I know many of you are in transition yourselves. Some of you are moving into new positions at the church you're at. Others of you are moving churches entirely. We are in the middle of a huge mix-up of pastors around the country. Lots of pastors are moving positions, moving churches. A lot of pastors are retiring. There is a ton of open positions around the country. And so I know that many of you are in transition and you're asking the question, God, what do we What are we doing? Where are we going? Where do you want us? God, what's your will for our life and for what's happening with our family? I want to encourage you. Stay in there. Stay praying. Stay focused. Hold on to faith. God will take care of you, even when it doesn't seem like things are working out the way you think they should. There have been at least 2 points in this process for my wife and I where we said, God, what are you doing here? Like, it seems like everything's falling apart and nothing's going the way it should. And, the timing is off and the circumstances are off. And when it's all played out, and as we've come to this point, we can look back and say, oh, I can see why God did it that way. I can see what God was doing there. And so if you're feeling that anxiety and you're feeling not sure about what's happening in the transition and what's going on in your life, just hold on to God. Hold on to the hem of his garment. Close your eyes and trust him. He will lead you, but you have to follow. And so I just want to encourage you in those times where you're just not sure and you're really struggling, maybe even with your faith, even struggling, God, are you really going to take care of me? Hang in there, because he will. It may just not look like the way you want it to, or the way you think it will, or the way it should. But he will take care of you. God has proven that over and over again to me in my own life, and I'm sure he has in you and in your life along the way. So I will keep you updated as transition is happening here for the Party Coopers. And I would love to hear any transitions going on in your life. And so if you want to drop me a line and just share what's happening with you, share what God's doing in your ministry, in your family, and the transitions that are happening in your world, feel free. You can send me an email to founder@brandonpartycooper.com. I love to get those emails. I love to respond and just hear what God's doing in the lives of pastors and ministry leaders all over the country. Okay, so what we're talking about today is putting the time into creating an engaging experience. As I've mentioned here at Ministry Hackers, our focus is to help you live your dream life in ministry. But at the same time, the one thing that has to happen in order for you to live your dream life in ministry is you have to have a pastoral staff team that is effective, that's able to carry the weight and lighten your load so that you don't feel overwhelmed and stressed and anxious all the time. Absolutely monumental to have that trained, developed, effective pastoral staff. But here's the problem. Hiring pastoral staff that are already there is really difficult. You don't know where they're coming from necessarily. Even when you look at their resumes, you can see kind of what they're trained. Did they go to Bible school, or did they go into seminary, or did they go to a ministry training school, or were they mentored by their senior pastor at their home church? How did they get into ministry? What's their training look like? On the resume, you can see that, but you never quite know exactly what you're getting, which means that we as pastors, as lead pastors, we have to put in the time and the effort to develop some sort of training experience for our pastors to go through so that we can develop them and get them to the point where they are efficient, where they are effective, where they are growing in their capacity, where they're growing in their skill set, where they're working on their craft as pastors and ministry leaders. And so, but the problem is, and this is where maybe the rubber meets the road. We can agree theoretically that yes, we need a pastoral training experience for our pastors to go through to help them be more effective. However, that means that I, as the lead pastor, have to take the time to actually develop that, build it, create it, grow it, whatever. And I just don't have that time. What I want to do is I want to give you 2 reasons why it's absolutely worth your time to do that. Why it's worth your time to develop an engaging experience for your pastors to go through as you're training them and helping them grow in the craft and skill set of being a pastor. The first one is that when you have an engaging pastoral training experience, it deepens your church culture. Now let me explain. Your church culture is developed. It's there. It exists. Whether you are intentional about it or not, it exists. And for many of us, so a lot of the problems that we deal with in our churches come from our culture. And for those of us who are intentional about creating our culture, we can identify the problems almost right away. And we know how to fix them because we understand the culture that we have built. However, many of us, especially those of us who have inherited churches, and for those of us who are in our first 2, 3, 4 years, sometimes we've inherited a church, we've stepped into a new position, and we've inherited the culture. And a lot of times, and I know the mantra is, don't do anything for at least a year. Don't make any major changes. Don't rock the boat. Just kind of come in and figure out what's going on. Now, I would agree with that to an extent. However, what I would say is that in that first year, you need to start figuring out and even making steps towards shifting the culture of the church. Now, if you're inheriting a great, strong, healthy, vibrant church that you just need to continue to guide in the direction it's going, that's a different story. But most of the time, that's not the case. Most of the time, when we step into a church, into a new position, we are stepping into something where we need to change the culture. And so your culture exists, and it's there, and some of us have inherited it. Some of us have passively allowed it to develop over time. And so it's determining how our church functions. Your church functions based on culture. Even more so than any strategy, any ministry you've created, any sermon you've preached, any of those things. Your culture is determining what your church looks like and how it operates and the ministry that it effectively does. Well, when you take the time to develop a pastoral training experience and you really create an engaging one where your pastors love it, they keep coming back for it, they want to keep learning, they want to keep applying, they want to keep growing. When you do that, when you take the time, however long it takes, to build that, you're not just training your pastors, but you are infusing into your church a culture shift. And here's why. Because when you are training your pastors and you are developing the way you want them to be, to minister, you're developing how you want them to approach their sermon prep, how you want them to approach their relationships with people in the church, you are infusing mentalities, attitudes, you're infusing in them values and principles. And so then what happens is your pastors then learn those in your training process, learn those, and then they go out and they minister to your faith community. They are taking that and they are passing it along. They're passing it out to the people that they train, they develop, the people that they spend time with, the people that are volunteering under them. And so they're taking what they learned from you in the training experience. They're taking that and they're going out and they're disseminating that out. And just like a football team or just like anything else, everything starts in the middle. So if you're building a great football team, you need to start in the middle. You start with the center, you start with a quarterback, you start with a good running back. When you have those things, then you can start working your way out. Start building out your line, start building out your receivers. When you do that, then you have a good offense. Well, same thing here. When you are developing and growing a church, especially if you're going through culture change or you need to go through culture change, it doesn't start with the congregation. It doesn't start with the new people coming in. You can't look for new people coming in to be this shift in your culture. It starts with your pastors. It starts with the pastors who are working closest to you. And if you can spend the time to create an engaging experience that trains them and develops them, then that, what they learn from you will then permeate out from there. It'll go to your core leaders. It'll go to your board members. It'll go to your primary volunteers. It will disseminate out because it's starting in that training experience that your pastors are going through. Those who are closest to you, which are your pastors, absolutely should be the ones closest to you. Your pastors are the ones who are shifting the culture. And think about if you have hired a pastor on staff, particularly a worship pastor or an executive associate pastor, even sometimes a youth pastor, when you hire them on, you will start to see a culture shift within the first year or two because they are now a part of creating the culture alongside you, especially if you have been passive in culture creation. If you've been a passive cultural architect in your church and you bring on a new staff member, you will start to see a culture shift. This is where church splits happen because you have a lead pastor who may be a little more passive in their approach to culture development and culture design. and you have an executive pastor or an associate pastor or a youth pastor who comes in, or a worship pastor coming in, and they start to not intentionally, lead the culture away, but because they're being more engaging or whatever, they start to create this subculture, and that grows and that overtakes the current culture. And then you have these two competing cultures within the church that eventually split off. And so my point is that if you want to create a culture or go through a culture shift, or especially if you're new to the position you're in your first 2 or 3 years, and there needs to be some culture change, start with an engaging training experience for your pastors. Because when you start training your pastors, then your culture will start to shift, and it will, again, 100% be worth the time and effort you put into it to guide and to become the architect of that cultural shift. Now, the second reason why it's worth your time to create an engaging experience in your pastoral training process is it makes management easier. So all of us as pastors, we kind of wear two hats. We wear the leadership hat and the manager hat. Most of us love the leadership hat. We get to inspire people, we get to preach sermons, and we get to talk people up and motivate them to go do great things and to go be a part of ministries and to go reach people. That's the leadership part. The management part is where we have to sit down with staff members and we have to talk about their lack of performance. We have to sit down with a volunteer and ask them why they aren't coming when they're supposed to, or why they're not doing something they're supposed to do, or on the extreme end, this is where we have to sit down with a staff member and fire them because they're underperforming, or because they've done something wrong, or they violated the policy manual or the cultural or community guidelines that you have at your church. That's the management side. And most of us don't really love the management side. It's systems and processes and policies, and most of us don't love that stuff. So here's the thing. When you create a training process, what you're doing is you're creating something else you have to manage. Now, again, I can argue the validity why you need to have it, especially if you want to live your dream life in ministry. You have to have an effective pastoral team to help you do that. So you need to create the training process, but it is creating something that you now have to manage. If you create it so that it's engaging and it draws your pastors in and they love it, what that means is that you don't have to manage it as much. When you create just a training process, a lecture style where it's not really engaging, it's not really fun, your pastoral staff doesn't really love going through it, it's not really adding a ton of great value for them, even though the content may be great, because they're not really engaged with it, they're not learning as much as they should. Well, then what happens is you then have to ask them, like, what's going on here? Why are you not growing? Why are you not developing? Why are you not following through and doing the training experience? What's going on? You have to then call them on the carpet and hold them accountable and all those things, because it's not engaging. It's not engaging, so they're not really getting into it, and they're not really getting into it, and so they're not really following through on developing and growing, and they're just off, doing ministry. They would much rather just be doing ministry than learning and growing. And so then you have to manage that. You have to, why are you not doing this? I just had a conversation with another pastor a few days ago who's implementing a training experience for his pastors, and some of them are doing great. Some of them are not. And he has to have a conversation with those who are not and find out why. He's asked them to do it. He's made it a part of their monthly cycle. He's given them benchmarks that they have to get through. And some of them are just essentially ignoring it. And so now he has to sit down with them and have this really tough conversation. Why are you why are you not doing it? And it just makes it more drudgery for you as the lead pastor, because now you have to manage it. You have to manage it either way, but you have to manage it more. Whereas let's say if you have 5 pastors on staff and 4 of them are loving it, it's engaging, and they're super on board and they're growing and they're developing. Well, you're not really managing that. You're cheering them on and you're answering questions and you're helping them to get more out of it, and you're going deeper in your discussions. That's not management, that's leadership. Well, let's say one of them is really just kind of kicking against the whole process, doesn't really want to do it. Well, now you have to manage that. But you're only managing one instead of 5. Whereas if you don't have a training process that's engaging, then you have to manage all 5 of them. And then you have a whole team that's rebelling against what you're asking them to do. If you put in the time to create an engaging experience, we don't have to manage it as much. You just have to lead them when they're going through it because it's engaging. They want to. They're learning and growing. They're seeing the results, and they're watching changes happening in themselves and changes happening in their ministry, and it's all because of this engaging experience that they're part of. And so, yes, you need effective pastoral staff in order to live your dream life in ministry. Yes, you need a training process in order to have an effective staff. And I would say it needs to be engaging in order to make all that possible. Is it going to take a little bit more time? Sure. Is it going to mean that you're going to have to think it through a little bit more? Yes. Are you going to have to, put a little bit more effort into creating something that's quality and good? Yes. Is it worth it? 100% yes. 100% yes. Again, because all that time you put into creating something that's engaging and that draws them in and makes them feel like they're growing and developing and making a difference in your church and in your community, all that time that you put into that is going to pay itself over and over and over again in dividends across the board. And this is how you start to create a pipeline of leaders in your church, is right here, creating an engaging training experience for your pastoral staff. And so those 2 reasons right there, just those 2 reasons, I think validate why you need to take the time to create an engaging pastoral training experience to take your staff through. Because I just think it'll make a huge difference for them. It'll make a huge difference for your congregation, your church, and it'll make a huge difference for you because you'll get to lead them more, manage them less, and you'll be infusing your church with a deeper sense of culture, and you will become the architect of the culture of your church rather than becoming just a passenger or, at the worst, a victim of the culture that you're pastoring in. So I hope that's super helpful. I hope you can start to see where an engaging experience would fit in for you and for your team and what you're trying to do wherever you are in the country and whatever it is you are doing and what God has called you to do. All right. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you in the next episode.